Leonio Sanchez was a powerhouse of influence in the vibrant capital. Nestled in his luxurious townhouse at the city's core, he led a life shrouded in an unspoken loneliness. He couldn't face this solitude, not even in his deepest thoughts. His days were a frantic blur of intense negotiations, ceaseless business trips, and an endless string of meetings. There was no pause button in Leonio's life, no moment to breathe or reflect. He moved through his world with unyielding confidence and precise determination, like an arrow soaring unerringly toward its mark. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Admiration and envy followed Sanchez wherever he went. His presence was a beacon on television shows, where hosts clamored for his insights. The public was insatiable, desperate to unravel the mystery of his phenomenal success. With a generous spirit, Leonio revealed his secrets of impeccable time management and strategic prowess. Yet, despite his openness, he remained an enigma, a solitary figure on an unreachable pedestal. At 45, this bachelor millionaire stood alone, untouchable in his success, a figure of awe and wonder, yet ultimately isolated in his towering achievements. This unsettling moment unfolded when Leonio returned from Switzerland and briefly stopped by home to change. His loyal maid, Teresa, who had diligently maintained his home for over 8 years, handed him her resignation letter. "I'm sorry, Señor Sanchez, but my children want to escape the noise of the capital and move closer to the sea. They're taking me with them. I deeply regret leaving this place, as I've grown fond of you, almost like a son. But there's nothing I can do. I yearn to spoil my grandchildren soon." And my daughter-in-law is expecting Leonio's face darkened with a frown. In his view, family and personal attachments only introduced chaos into the meticulously ordered life he had crafted. To the millionaire, family ties were a source of unnecessary complications. Indeed, Leonio often functioned more like a machine than a human being, but in the ruthless realm of big business, there was no alternative. One had to forge ahead relentlessly or risk losing everything. With a generous sum, he paid Teresa and immediately called his secretary to arrange for a new maid. His instructions were precise: she must be unmarried and childless. "Find me someone plain and unobtrusive, Sylvia." He instructed his secretary, someone who stays home in the evenings and doesn't attract men's attention. That kind of person will stick around for a long time. "Understood, Señor Sanchez," Sylvia acknowledged. "I'll do my utmost." The following day, Leonio encountered his new maid for the first time. She appeared strikingly modest: a faded gray sweater, a black skirt that modestly draped below her knees, chestnut hair restrained in a simple ponytail, blue eyes peering timidly from behind glasses, and on her feet, sturdy, old-fashioned boots. Her voice was soft and hesitant, and she nervously fidgeted with the strap of her bag. "Exactly what I need," Sanchez mused with satisfaction. "Sylvia, as always, has nailed it. Where did she even find her? It's as if this girl was an ancient exhibit in a museum until yesterday." "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Blanca," she replied softly, her eyes avoiding his intense gaze. "Excellent," Leonio nodded, a hint of approval in his tone. "You'll come every morning, even in my absence, and clean thoroughly. The bedding must be changed every other day. Ensure that you dust the plants and the glassware in the cabinets daily. At the end of your cleaning, put on white socks and walk through all the rooms. If the socks remain pristine, you've done your job perfectly and may go home. If not, please redo the floors. Is that clear?" Blanca nodded obediently, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Señor Sanchez." "Is she truly this quiet, or is she just pretending?" Leonio pondered. "She needs to be tested." After the girl left, Leonio strode into his office and unlocked both of his safes, transferring the money from one to the other. He opened one of the bundles and extracted a dozen large bills, which he carelessly tossed into the now empty safe. Then he securely closed the first safe, leaving the second one slightly ajar, enough to catch the eye. "Let's see if she's as modest as she seems at first glance," Leonio thought smugly as he turned on the surveillance camera. The next day, he packed his suitcase and departed for another business trip. After 2 days, Leonio returned. Upon entering the house, he was immediately greeted by a pleasant fragrance in the hall. He walked through the rooms, noting that everything was immaculate and in perfect order. Not a speck of dust or a single crumb on the floor. Feeling satisfied, Leonio decided to unwind with a relaxing bath. The bathroom was also gleaming clean. On the table were new, unopened shampoo, shaving cream, and toothpaste. Leonio was impressed by the maid's attentiveness. He hadn't mentioned anything about purchasing personal hygiene products, apparently. She had noticed they were running low and took the initiative. After his bath, he donned his favorite dark blue terry cloth robe and soft slippers, feeling a rare moment of contentment, and made his way to his office. "So far, I'm pleased, but let's see what the video shows," Leonio muttered aloud. Despite his exhaustion from the flight, his habit of making prompt decisions took precedence. "If she didn't take anything from the safe, I'll have no more questions about her candidacy," he thought to himself. He turned on the TV screen, displayed the image of the room, and rewound the video to the appropriate moment. Fast-forwarding it, he sat on the couch and began watching. The footage wasn't particularly thrilling. The maid, dressed in her black uniform with a white apron, entered the office and began her cleaning routine. She meticulously stacked the scattered papers and folders on the desk, mopped the floor, and dusted the bookshelves and safes. Leonio yawned and fast-forwarded to the next day, where the same mundane activities repeated themselves, almost lulling him to sleep. This time, however, he noticed the maid walking across the floor in white socks, her expression serious and tense, which amused Sanchez. He was about to turn off the video, satisfied that the maid hadn't touched his money, when suddenly the footage showed Blanca re-entering his office. She was no longer in her uniform, but wearing her street clothes, the familiar gray sweater and wide dark blue jeans. She stood in the middle of the office, appearing hesitant and conflicted. Leonio leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with keen interest. What was she going to do? He watched intently as Blanca seemed to wrestle with herself, her body language betraying a deep inner struggle. Determination finally settled on Blanca's face. She approached the bookshelves and picked up a book. The millionaire stood up from the couch for a better view. Was she planning to borrow something from his home library? She really is a bookworm, Leonio thought with a laugh. His amusement quickly turned to shock when he realized Blanca wasn't holding a book at all, but his old photo album. Leonio couldn't believe his eyes. Why would she need his photographs? In amazement, he watched as the girl hastily flipped through the pages on the video, stopped at one, and pulled out a photograph. She then looked around sneakily and quickly tucked it into her pocket. Leonio Sanchez was consumed by anger. Could this girl really be a journalist, a paparazzi, who had deceitfully infiltrated his home? So that's why she wanted to appear so modest, the millionaire muttered as he turned off the video and rushed to the bookshelf. Finding the album, he angrily flipped through the pages. All the photos were in place except one. Leonio Sanchez tiredly sank back onto the couch, dropping the album to the floor, and stared blankly ahead for a long time. He wasn't thinking of anything, not recalling anything, but his heart was painfully gripped by what seemed like long-forgotten bitterness and disappointment. The betrayal stung deeply, reopening old wounds he thought had healed. The image of Blanca's deceit replayed in his mind, mingling with the haunting memories of past betrayals. It wasn't just the loss of the photograph that tormented him, but the realization that even in his meticulously controlled life, trust remained a fragile and elusive luxury. Leonio didn't know how long he sat there, lost in a strange trance. The loud ticking of the clock finally broke his reverie. The millionaire stood up, brushed aside strands of damp hair that had fallen on his face, and calmly left the office. Tomorrow, he would instruct Sylvia to arrange a meeting with the new maid in his office. Right now, he knew one thing: he needed rest to be at his best for the difficult conversation ahead. The next morning, Leonio Sanchez woke up 10 minutes before the alarm, a habit he had developed over the years. He got up, took a shower, and brewed some coffee. After drinking it, he dressed and headed to the office. Sylvia, as usual, greeted him in the reception area. She was wearing a red suit, and the tall, slender blonde looked as striking as ever. She rightfully considered herself the face of the company. "Good morning, Mr. Sanchez," she said cheerfully. "How was your trip?" "Excellent, as always," Leonio replied briskly. "Sylvia, I have a request for you." "What is it, sir?" "Call the new maid. Have her come here to the office. I need to talk to her." "When?" "The sooner the better." "Understood, Mr. Sanchez." Sylvia responded with professional efficiency, immediately picking up the phone to make the call. Leonio walked into his office, his mind swirling with thoughts. The maid's betrayal weighed heavily on him, and he was determined to confront her and uncover the truth. He sat at his desk, staring at the photo album he had discarded the night before. The missing photograph gnawed at him, symbolizing more than just a physical loss. It represented the vulnerability he so carefully guarded against. Minutes later, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Leonio called out, straightening in his chair. Blanca entered, her eyes downcast, visibly nervous. "You wanted to see me, Senor Sanchez?" she asked softly. "Blanca, please come in and sit down," Leonio said, motioning toward the chair across from his desk. "I need to discuss something with you." Blanca took her seat, her hands shaking slightly as she clasped them together in her lap. "What do you need, sir?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Leaning in, Leonio's eyes locked onto hers with a piercing intensity. "I reviewed the security footage from my office yesterday. I saw you take a photograph from my album. Can you explain why?" Blanca's face went ashen, and she seemed on the verge of fainting. I am deeply sorry, Senor Sanchez," she stuttered, her voice trembling with anxiety. "I didn't mean any harm. I saw someone in that photo. It was my mother. She worked for you many years ago. I just wanted something to remember her by. I didn't know how to ask you." Leonio's anger began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of shock and curiosity. "Your mother," he repeated, his mind racing to recall any former employees who might fit the description. Her unexpected revelation left him genuinely taken aback, his stern demeanor softening as he tried to connect the pieces of the past. "Yes," Blanca continued, her eyes brimming with tears. "She passed away when I was just a child, and I don't have many pictures of her. Seeing her photo in your album, I couldn't resist taking it. I'm deeply sorry for taking it without asking." Leonio leaned back in his chair, absorbing the weight of her words. The anger and disappointment that had filled him now seemed unfounded. He realized that beneath his rigid exterior, there were still reservoirs of compassion and empathy he hadn't tapped into in years. "Blanca," he said softly, his voice losing its edge, "I wish you had come to me directly. I would have understood. Bring the photo back, and we'll make a copy for you. There's no need for secrecy when it comes to something so heartfelt." Blanca nodded, a wave of relief washing over her features. "Thank you, Senor Sanchez. I'll return it immediately." As she left his office, Leonio sat in silence, reflecting on the unexpected depth of the human heart and the profound connections that can bridge past and present. As Blanca exited the office, Leonio leaned back in his chair, feeling a profound sense of closure. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn, yet it served as a poignant reminder of the importance of compassion and human connection, even in a life dominated by business and ambition. He reflected on how moments of genuine understanding could bridge the gap between past regrets and present realities. "All right, Mr. Sanchez." "I'll call right away," Sylvia said, breaking his reverie as she turned to make the call. Leonio nodded, offering a faint smile before retreating into his office. He sat at his desk, the weight of the recent interaction settling in, and allowed himself a moment of introspection. An hour passed in quiet contemplation, punctuated only by the soft hum of his thoughts. Then, a timid knock broke the silence, pulling him back to the present. "Come in," he called, his voice calm and inviting, ready to face whatever came next with a renewed sense of empathy and openness. "Enter," he commanded firmly. Leonio Sanchez, his brows furrowed deeply, stood rigid with his arms tightly crossed over his chest as Blanca nervously stepped in and sat down hesitantly across from him. "Well," Leonio began with a harsh edge to his voice, "reveal it now. Which newspaper employs you?" Blanca's eyes widened in sheer astonishment, and she stared at the wealthy man in utter bewilderment. "I don't understand what you're implying," she stammered, her voice trembling. "But I believe you grasp it all too well," Sanchez responded with an unyielding tone. "I witnessed everything. A camera was concealed in the office." Blanca's face drained of color as she averted her gaze, the room thick with an oppressive silence. "Are you referring to the photo I took from the album?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Precisely," Leonio snapped, his fury and irritation unmistakable. "How cunningly she masquerades as an innocent lamb," he thought bitterly to himself. Blanca inhaled deeply, trying to steady her quivering voice. "Señor Sanchez, I'm not a journalist. I have no affiliation with any newspaper. The photograph I took was deeply personal. It was a picture of my mother. She worked for you many years ago. I recognized her and wanted a memento." Leonio's eyes narrowed, his expression marked by skepticism. "Your mother," he echoed, his voice laden with disbelief. "Who was she?" "Her name was Isabella," Blanca replied, her voice wavering with emotion. "She was your housekeeper when I was a child. She used to regale me with stories about this place. She passed away when I was young, and I don't have many pictures of her. When I saw her photo in your album, I couldn't resist taking it." The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of unspoken memories. Blanca's eyes brimmed with tears as she recalled her mother's warm smile and gentle touch. The photograph was more than just an image, it was a precious link to a past filled with love and loss, a tangible reminder of a woman who had meant the world to her. Leonio's anger began to wane, replaced by a mix of surprise and contemplation. He remembered Isabella, a dedicated and kind-hearted woman who had worked for him years ago. He could now see the resemblance in Blanca's eyes. "I wish you had come to me directly," Leonio said, his tone softening slightly. "Taking something without permission is not the right way to go about it." "I'm truly sorry, Señor Sanchez," Blanca said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't know how to ask you. I was afraid you wouldn't understand." Leonio sighed, feeling a twinge of guilt for his harshness. "Bring the photo back," he said, his voice gentler. "We can make a copy for you. There's no need for secrecy in matters of the heart." Blanca nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. The weight of her fear and uncertainty began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope. She realized that her mother's memory could be honored without deceit. As Leonio watched her, he felt a deep sense of empathy. He had been harsh, but now he saw the genuine pain in Blanca's eyes. "Your mother was a wonderful woman," Leonio said softly, his own memories flooding back. "She would be proud of you." Blanca smiled through her tears, feeling a connection not only to her mother but also to the man who had once been her employer. The photograph, once a symbol of loss, now became a bridge to healing and understanding. Blanca nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you, Señor Sanchez. I'll bring it back right away. As Blanca left the office, Leonio leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. The encounter had reminded him that beneath his hardened exterior, there was still room for understanding and compassion. For a moment, the barriers of his meticulously controlled life seemed a little less insurmountable. Blanca paused at the door, her blue eyes meeting his once more. Yes, I took it, but I swear I don't work for a newspaper, and I didn't intend to publish it. There was sincerity in her tone that struck Leonio. Either she's a good actress, or she's telling the truth, he thought fleetingly. Then why did you take the photograph? And why he paused as if gathering strength, that one. Blanca took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. That photograph was of my mother, she said softly. It's one of the few images I have of her. She worked for you years ago, and when I saw it, I felt an overwhelming need to have a piece of her with me. Leonio's gaze softened further. Isabella, he murmured, the name bringing back a flood of memories. She was an incredible woman. I understand now. Blanca's eyes filled with tears. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you would see it as a betrayal. Leonio shook his head, a small smile forming. Sometimes emotions make us do things that seem irrational. Your love for your mother is clear, and it's something to be respected, not condemned. Blanca nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. Thank you, Señor Sanchez. I'll bring the photograph back, and I appreciate your kindness. Leonio watched her go, the heavy silence of his office now tinged with a sense of renewal. He had learned something important today, that even in the world of strict rules and expectations, there was room for empathy and understanding. As the door closed behind Blanca, he felt the rigid walls around his heart begin to soften, leaving space for a compassion he had long forgotten. Blanca's chin trembled, barely holding back tears. Mr. Sanchez, I took this picture because it shows you with my mother. Those words struck Leonio like a bolt of lightning. He was rendered speechless, struggling to process what he had just heard. What did you say? He asked hesitantly, wondering if he had misheard. In the photograph I took from your album, it's you with my mother, Blanca repeated quietly. Lord, your mother, he asked, still unable to believe that this was actually happening. Blanca nodded. But how is this possible? It can't be a coincidence. Blanca looked him in the eyes and nodded again. Of course not, she replied, a hint of disdain in her voice. I knew from the beginning what kind of man I was dealing with by taking this job. Leonio Sanchez was stunned. He had suspected that Blanca was simply playing the role of a modest and quiet girl, but he never imagined she was capable of hurling such accusations directly at him. His mind raced, trying to recall the events and the woman who now seemed to bridge the gap between past and present. You knew Leonio's voice was a mix of confusion and dawning realization. Yes, I knew, Blanca said, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. I knew you had a connection to my mother. I needed to see for myself what kind of person you really are. Leonio was at a loss for words. The photograph, which he had barely glanced at over the years, now held a significance he could never have imagined. Memories of Isabella flashed through his mind, her kindness, her dedication, and now the revelation that her daughter stood before him, accusing him of wrongdoing. Blanca, he began, his voice softer, I never knew you were Isabella's daughter. If I had known, things might have been different. Blanca's eyes, filled with a mixture of sorrow and defiance, met his. It doesn't change the fact that I had to sneak around to get answers. It doesn't change the way you treated me when you thought I was a threat. Leonio sighed deeply, feeling the weight of his past actions pressing down on him. You're right, he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I was wrong to judge you so harshly. I let my fears and suspicions cloud my judgment. Blanca's expression softened slightly, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I just wanted to remember my mother, she whispered. I wanted a piece of her with me. Leonio nodded, understanding the depth of her pain. You can keep the photograph, he said gently. And if you want, I can tell you more about her, about the time she spent here. Blanca's tears finally spilled over, a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. Thank you, she murmured, feeling a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. In that moment, the past and present intertwined, forging a new understanding between them. The photograph, once a mere image, became a symbol of connection, memory, and the possibility of healing old wounds. What do you mean by that, he demanded, his voice rising with a mix of anger and confusion. Blanca took a deep breath, steeling herself. My mother worked for you years ago. She spoke of you often, about the kind of person you were. I wanted to see for myself if the stories were true, and I thought working for you would give me that chance. I never expected to find that photograph, though. Leonio's mind raced, recalling the past and the housekeeper he had known. Isabella, he whispered, the name finally coming to him. Your mother was Isabella. Blanca nodded again, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes, she was, and I took that photograph because it's the only picture I have of her with you. I didn't mean to steal, I just wanted something to remember her by. Leonio's anger began to dissolve, replaced by a whirlwind of memories and emotions. Isabella had been more than just an employee, she had been a trusted confidante, someone who had shown unwavering loyalty and kindness. And now her daughter stood before him, driven by a similar longing for connection and understanding. Isabella, he repeated, his voice softer, almost reverent. She was a remarkable woman. I had no idea you were her daughter. Blanca's tears spilled over, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. She used to tell me stories about this place, about you. When she passed away, I was left with so little of her. Finding that photograph was like finding a piece of her I thought I'd lost forever. Leonio felt a pang of guilt and sorrow. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, he said, his tone filled with genuine remorse. I let my suspicions cloud my judgment. You deserved better. Blanca nodded, feeling a sense of relief and understanding. Thank you for saying that, she replied quietly. I just wanted to know the man my mother spoke so highly of. Leonio looked at her with newfound respect and compassion. You can keep the photograph, he said gently. And if you want, I can share more stories about your mother so you can know her as I did. Blanca's eyes shone with gratitude. I would like that very much, she whispered, feeling a glimmer of hope and healing. In that moment, the heavy burden of their past misunderstandings began to lift. The photograph, once a point of contention, now served as a bridge between their shared histories. It symbolized not just a memory, but a promise of reconciliation and the chance to honor Isabella's legacy together. Leonio's anger began to melt away, replaced by a mix of regret and understanding. He realized how much pain and longing must have driven Blanca to act as she did. Why didn't you just tell me, he asked, his voice softer now. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, Blanca replied, her voice breaking. I thought you would see me as a thief, not as a daughter trying to hold on to a piece of her past. Leonio sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation. Blanca, I'm sorry for my harshness. I didn't know. Bring the photograph back, and we'll make a copy for you. You deserve to have that memory. Blanca nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Thank you, Señor Sanchez. I will. As she left the office, Leonio sat back, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. This encounter had peeled back the layers of his meticulously controlled life, revealing a vulnerability he had long buried. For a moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed a little less impenetrable, and he felt a flicker of connection to the human experiences he had so often kept at bay. Then, his earlier anger flared up once more, conflicting with his newfound empathy. "How dare you," he erupted, regaining some composure. "You stole something that belongs to me, and now you allow yourself to make such statements. How dare you?" Blanca met his gaze, her demeanor shifting from vulnerable to resolute. "I stole one thing from you, but you stole everything from my mother," she exclaimed, her voice steady and cold. Leonio's heart squeezed with pain. "Me? I stole," he muttered, feeling the bitterness welling up inside him. Blanca's eyes narrowed, and she proudly lifted her chin. "What are you talking about? My mother is not capable of such things." Leonio stared at her, his mind racing. "What do you mean by that?" he demanded, his anger and confusion mixing once more. Blanca took a deep breath, steeling herself. "My mother worked for you for years. She gave you her loyalty, her hard work, and you took her kindness for granted. When she needed help, when she fell ill, you dismissed her without a second thought. She was left with nothing, struggling to survive, and that broke her spirit." Leonio's anger began to dissolve again, replaced by a heavy guilt. "I had no idea," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know she was ill. I thought she left because she wanted to." Blanca's eyes were filled with tears now, but they also held a fierce determination. She didn't want to leave. She needed you to be there for her, and you weren't. You stole her dignity, her security, and her hope. Leonio felt the full weight of her words, each one striking him with the force of a painful truth. "Blanca," he said, his voice trembling, "I am truly sorry. If I had known, I would have done things differently." Blanca nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but it's too late for my mother. I just wanted you to know the truth." Leonio reached out, a tentative gesture of reconciliation. "Please let me make it right in any way I can. I owe your mother that much." Blanca looked at him, her expression softening just a little. "Maybe," she said, "maybe there is a way to honor her memory, but it will take more than just words." Leonio nodded, understanding the challenge in her statement. "I'll do whatever it takes," he vowed. "Your mother deserves that, and so do you." As Blanca left the office, the heavy silence that followed was filled with the weight of unspoken promises and the potential for redemption. Leonio's heart was heavy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that he could change, that he could be the man Isabella once believed him to be. But Leonio Sanchez no longer heard her words. Memories of distant days, which he had long suppressed, trying to erase from his memory, burst free and now surged onto the man with furious force. He closed his eyes and involuntarily transported himself 22 years back. Back then, Leonio had just graduated from university and was actively searching for his first job. He came from an ordinary family with no connections to rely on. Sanchez already knew then that he should rely only on himself. He walked into company offices and personally handed his resume to the secretaries of the bosses. Lord was the assistant to the director of one of the promising firms engaged in logistics. When Leoncio first looked into her blue eyes, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was so taken with this slim, red-haired girl. The young man understood that asking for a number was too bold, but at the same time, he felt that he wouldn't get another chance. So, blushing and stuttering, he dared to suggest meeting her for lunch. Lord, with a condescending look, glanced at his worn-out suit but agreed. They met the next day, and Leoncio took Lord to a restaurant that was clearly beyond his means. However, he felt that she deserved to dine only there, so he decisively spent his last money on fine wine and expensive dishes. Lord was impressed. It seemed she had never been to such places before, just like Leonio himself. Later they laughed a lot, remembering the pompous rich people at neighboring tables. The first date was followed by the second, third, and fourth. Leonio and Lord enjoyed each other's company. They had plenty to talk about, and they were surprised to find that they often understood each other with just a half word. Now, in the quiet of his office, those memories came flooding back. He remembered the thrill of their first meeting, the joy of discovering a shared connection with someone who seemed so far out of his league. He recalled the laughter, the awkwardness, and the feeling of hope that each new day brought. But as he stood there, the harsh reality of the present crashed back down on him. Blanca's words had stirred up a tempest of emotions within him. The memories of his past collided with the bitter truth of what he had become. He realized how far he had drifted from the young man who had once been so full of dreams and possibilities. The harshness and rigidity that had come to define his life now seemed so alien to the person he had once been. Opening his eyes, Leonio felt a profound sense of loss and regret. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but perhaps there was still time to make amends. Blanca's presence had reawakened something in him, a desire to reconnect with the humanity he had long buried under layers of ambition and success. He turned his attention back to the present, determined to make things right. "Blanca," he called out, his voice softer, filled with a newfound resolve. "Please come back. Let's talk more about your mother, about Isabella. I want to hear everything." Blanca paused at the doorway, turning back to face him. She saw the change in his eyes, the sincerity that had replaced the anger and suspicion. "All right, Señor Sanchez," she replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I'll tell you everything." As they sat down together, the past and present began to merge, creating a bridge of understanding and compassion. Leonio listened intently as Blanca shared her mother's stories, each word a step toward healing the wounds of the past. And in that moment, he realized that redemption was not just about making amends for his mistakes, but also about rediscovering the parts of himself that he had lost along the way. Gradually, the young man realized that he couldn't imagine his life without Lord and decided to introduce her to his parents. Leoncio was very nervous, but his anxiety turned out to be groundless. The family dinner went perfectly. The atmosphere was warm and pleasant. Mom and Dad looked at Lord with admiring glances, and Leonio felt pride and joy. That evening, he confessed his love to the girl for the first time. They stood on the veranda. The evening was warm, and the stars shone above them. Leonio felt that there was no one happier in the world than him. He and Lord tightly held hands. Then he leaned towards her ear and whispered, "I want you to be my wife." Lord laughed and whispered back, "But you haven't met my family yet. What if you changed your mind?" But the young man shook his head. Not for anything they kissed under the stars for a long time, and then the parents called them to taste Mom's chocolate cake. Leonio couldn't forget that magical evening. The warmth of his parents' acceptance, the joy of seeing their smiles, and the overwhelming love he felt for Lord. They stood on the veranda, the night sky glittering with stars, as if the universe itself was celebrating their love. Leonio's heart was bursting with happiness as he held Lord's hand, feeling the softness and warmth of her touch. He could feel the love radiating between them, a love so pure and strong that it seemed to make the stars shine even brighter. "I want you to be my wife," he had whispered, his voice filled with emotion. Lord's laughter was like music to his ears. "But you haven't met my family yet. What if you changed your mind?" she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Leonio shook his head firmly. Not for anything, he declared with conviction. Their kiss under the stars felt like a promise, a bond that nothing could break. The world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, wrapped in each other's embrace. It was a moment of pure bliss, a memory that would stay with Leonio forever. As they were called back inside to taste Mom's chocolate cake, Leonio felt a sense of completeness he had never known before. Surrounded by his loving family and holding the hand of the woman he adored, he knew that life couldn't get any better. The evening ended with laughter and joy, a perfect celebration of love and family. Now, sitting in his office, Leonio felt a pang of longing for those simpler times. The memories of his youthful love with Lord contrasted sharply with the man he had become. He realized how much he had lost in his relentless pursuit of success, how many important moments he had let slip away. He knew he couldn't change the past, but perhaps he could honor those memories by being a better man now. Blanca's presence had reawakened something in him, a desire to reconnect with the values and emotions he had once cherished. As he looked at her, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would listen to her, learn about her mother, and try to make amends for the mistakes of the past. "Blanca," he called softly, "let's talk. I want to hear everything about your mother and the time she spent with us." Blanca turned back, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Together, they would bridge the gap between past and present, finding healing and understanding in the shared stories of those they had loved and lost. The next weekend, Lord invited Leonio to her house. "Now it's my turn to introduce you to my parents," she declared. Naturally, Leoncio was nervous again, even more than the first time. He spent a long time choosing a shirt, then carefully ironed it, but it still seemed wrinkled to him. Finally, he got ready and left the house. Lord's parents lived a few blocks away from him, so Leonio decided to walk. On the way, he bought flowers and chocolates for Lord, her mother, and her younger sister. The young man tried to remember her name, but he couldn't. In conversations, Lord always called her little sister Dragonfly just outside the house. Her name finally surfaced in his memories: Federica. Lord had mentioned once that her younger sister was named after their grandfather. Leoncio knocked on the door. It swung open, revealing a red-haired girl who looked about 14. "Hi, Federica," the young man said cheerfully. "I'm Leonio, your sister's friend." He expected the girl to smile at him, but she only furrowed her brow and muttered something incomprehensible before disappearing. Shrugging, Leonio entered the spacious corridor. The family was not poor. They lived in a large mansion where there was plenty of room for everyone. As Leonio stepped into the grand foyer, he couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed. The house was elegant, with high ceilings and beautifully decorated rooms. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he followed Federica into the living room. Lord was waiting for him, her smile instantly putting him at ease. She looked radiant, her eyes shining with excitement as she introduced him to her parents. "Mom, Dad, this is Leonio," she said, her voice filled with pride. Lord's parents greeted him warmly. Her mother, a graceful woman with kind eyes, took the flowers and chocolates with a smile. "Thank you, Leonio. These are lovely," she said, placing them on the table. Her father, a distinguished-looking man, shook his hand firmly. "Welcome, Leonio. We've heard a lot about you," he said, his tone friendly and inviting. Leonio felt a wave of relief wash over him. Despite his earlier nerves, the warmth and hospitality of Lord's family made him feel at home. They sat down to a delicious meal, filled with laughter and engaging conversation. Leonio found himself sharing stories from his childhood and listening intently as Lord's parents recounted amusing anecdotes about their daughters. Throughout the evening, Leonio couldn't help but steal glances at Lord. She was glowing with happiness, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for having her in his life. Federica, who had initially seemed indifferent, began to warm up to him as the night progressed. By the end of the dinner, she was laughing along with the rest of the family, her earlier reticence forgotten. After dinner, they moved to the cozy sitting room where Mom served her famous homemade apple pie. Leonio couldn't remember the last time he had felt so content and at peace. As they sat by the crackling fire, he realized how much he wanted to be a part of this family, to share his life with Lord and build a future together. When the evening finally came to an end, Lord walked Leonio to the door. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered, her eyes filled with emotion. My family really likes you." Leonio smiled, feeling a rush of happiness. "I'm glad. I like them too," he replied, leaning in to kiss her gently. "And I love you, Lord." She smiled back, her face radiant with joy. "I love you too, Leonio." As he walked home under the starry sky, Leonio felt as if he was floating. The night had been perfect, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Lord would face them together. The memories of this evening would stay with him forever, a reminder of the love and happiness they shared, and the bright future that awaited them. A few moments later, Lord descended the stairs. She wore a lovely red dress with a deep neckline and a beautiful pearl necklace. Her hair was elegantly pinned up at the back, adorned with a shiny hairpin. "Oh, I see Dragonfly has let you in already," she exclaimed joyfully upon seeing Leoncio. "Yes," and then promptly vanished, he admitted with a laugh. "That's her style," Lord laughed, taking the flowers and chocolates from him. "Let's go to the living room. Our parents are already waiting for us there," she said. Leoncio took a deep breath and followed her. Lord's parents turned out to be very nice people and excellent conversationalists. They asked Leonio about his work, and he willingly shared the latest news. He had managed to get a job at a good company that dealt with investments. The living room was warm and inviting, with a crackling fireplace and comfortable seating. Lord's mother, a graceful woman with a gentle smile, welcomed him warmly. "Thank you for the flowers and chocolates, Leonio. They're lovely," she said, placing them on the table. Her father, a distinguished-looking man with a kind demeanor, extended his hand. "Welcome, Leonio. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Lord has told us so much about you," he said. Leonio felt his nerves easing as they sat down together. The conversation flowed naturally, with Lord's parents showing genuine interest in his life and work. "So, Leonio, tell us about your job," Lord's father prompted. Leonio smiled, grateful for their interest. "I recently started working at an investment firm. It's a great opportunity, and I'm learning a lot about the industry," he explained. Lord's mother nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful. It's always exciting to hear about new ventures and opportunities," she said. As they continued to talk, Leonio found himself relaxing and enjoying the evening. The warmth and kindness of Lord's parents made him feel at home, and he could see where Lord had inherited her charm and grace. They laughed and shared stories, and Leonio felt a deep sense of belonging. Lord's father leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "Investments, you say? That's a challenging field. What drew you to it?" he asked. Leonio thought for a moment before answering. "I've always been fascinated by finance and the potential for growth and innovation within the industry. It's demanding, but I enjoy the challenge and the opportunity to make a positive impact," he said. Lord's parents exchanged a pleased glance. "It's clear you have a passion for your work, Leonio." "That's important," her father remarked. As the evening progressed, they moved to the dining room for a delicious dinner. The food was excellent, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter. Leonio felt a growing sense of connection with Lord's family, appreciating their genuine hospitality and the way they made him feel welcomed. After dinner, they returned to the living room for dessert. Lord's mother served her famous homemade apple pie, and Leonio couldn't help but marvel at how perfect the evening had been. As they sat by the fire, he felt a deep sense of contentment and joy. When it was time to leave, Lord walked him to the door. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered, her eyes shining with emotion. "My parents really like you." Leonio smiled, feeling a rush of happiness. "I'm glad. I like them too," he replied, leaning in to kiss her gently. "And I love you, Lord." She smiled back, her face radiant with joy. "I love you too, Leonio." As he walked home under the starry sky, Leonio felt as if he was floating. The night had been perfect, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Lord would face them together. The memories of this evening would stay with him forever, a reminder of the love and happiness they shared, and the bright future that awaited them. "We're so happy for you," Leonio Lord's mom said. "Our daughter said you were looking for quite some time, and unfortunately, her company rejected your application." "Yes, that's true, but I'm not upset about it. Lord's company has given me a treasure that turned out to be much more valuable than any of their positions," Leonio replied, smiling gently at his girlfriend. She smiled back at him. Federica, however, frowned at the sight. She hastily stuffed everything on her plate into her mouth, and without thanking anyone, went to her room. "Federica clearly doesn't like me," Leonio whispered to Lord. She just waved her hand in response. "Don't pay attention to her, darling. She's always like that." Leoncio wanted to believe her, but something told him that Lord was wrong. Apart from Federica's provocative behavior, the evening was a great success. When Leonio kissed Lord goodbye and left the house, he felt great. The worry of the past few days had receded, and he was happy that the challenging moments were behind him. Now he could calmly propose to Lord and prepare for the wedding. With his new job, he could afford a larger apartment where they both would feel cozy and comfortable. With these optimistic thoughts, Leoncio returned home, took a shower, and peacefully fell asleep. Everything was turning out just as he had planned, even better. An old university friend who had become a real estate agent found him a beautiful apartment in the city center, overlooking a beautiful park. Leonio went to see it alone. He wanted to surprise Lord. He walked through the bright rooms, trying to imagine Lord's reaction, and it seemed to him that he couldn't find anything better. The apartment seemed to be made for the two of them. Without any further doubt, Leoncio made the deposit. Then he went downtown to buy a ring for Lord. He pondered over options for a long time until he settled on a delicate and very elegant ring adorned with a pale blue topaz, just like the color of her eyes, he thought. He bought the ring on credit, intending to pay for it with his next paycheck. Now it was just left to propose to Lord. Leoncio carefully considered the details for a long time. He wanted everything to be very beautiful and romantic. While walking through the center, he noticed a small but cozy restaurant where a violinist was playing. He entered and ordered a cup of coffee. The waiter brought Leoncio his order, and the young man sat for a long time, listening to the musician. Dreams took him somewhere far away. He imagined walking through life hand in hand with Lord and how she would become his only destiny. They would have children, then grandchildren, and they would spend their old age in a little house by the lake somewhere outside the city. Leoncio even shed a tear. He envisioned it all so vividly. Then he got up, paid for the coffee, and firmly decided to return here with Lord and propose to her to the beautiful sounds of the violin. It happened the following week, and everything went perfectly. Lord suspected nothing. She was more beautiful than ever. Her pink dress accentuated her fragility and tenderness. She curled and let her hair loose, and they cascaded in beautiful waves down her shoulders and back. Leoncio felt like everyone around was only looking at Lord, and he felt proud that this girl would soon be his wife. Leoncio felt like the luckiest and happiest person on earth. He was beside a beautiful woman, and things at work were going better than ever. It was like a fairy tale. When the violinist played one of the most poignant and tender melodies, Leonio got down on one knee and proposed to Lord. She couldn't hold back her tears. Everyone around applauded. "Will you marry me?" Leoncio asked, looking at her with eyes shining with anticipation of happiness. "Yes," the girl replied. "Yes, I will." The guests applauded the beautiful couple once again. Leoncio lifted Lord up and twirled her around to the beautiful sounds of the violin. When they sat down at the table, a gray-haired man with long mustaches approached them. He wore an old-fashioned checkered jacket and trousers with pleats. "You're a very beautiful couple, and I'm a retired photographer," he said softly. "It sounds strange, but it happens. I got so tired of photographing endless and monotonous weddings that 5 years ago I swore I wouldn't take another photo. But you've inspired me. There's so much love emanating from you. So allow me to take just one photo." Lord smiled and nodded. Leoncio sat next to her and hugged his beloved, and a man took their picture. A couple of days later, he sent a copy of the photo to Sanchez's office. Leoncio carefully tucked it into his planner to show Lord later. The wedding was scheduled for the end of April. There was just over a month left to prepare. However, life intervened in the lovers' perfect plans. One morning, Leoncio came to work and saw a note from his boss asking him to come to his office. Surprised and somewhat nervous, Sanchez immediately went to the chief's office. On the way, he pondered why the boss needed to see him. He really hoped he wouldn't be fired for some unknown reason. After all, the wedding was just around the corner, and they were planning to move to a new apartment. Losing his job now would be unthinkable. However, Leoncio's fears were unfounded. He immediately noticed that the boss was in a good mood. He greeted him warmly with a friendly smile. "I have news for you," Sanchez said, the boss, "and I hope you'll be as pleased with it as I am." Leoncio smiled. "I certainly hope so too." The boss gestured to the chair opposite him, and the young man sat down. "The thing is," continued the boss, "we're opening our first overseas branch." Leoncio's eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. "That's incredible news," he exclaimed. "Where will the new branch be located?" "Paris," the boss replied with a grin. "And we want you to lead the team there." Leoncio felt a rush of emotions: excitement, disbelief, and a hint of apprehension. "Me? Lead the team in Paris," he repeated, trying to process the information. The boss nodded. "You've shown exceptional skill and dedication, Sanchez. We believe you're the perfect person for this job. Of course, it will require you to relocate, but we will provide full support for the move." Leoncio's mind raced. The opportunity was incredible, but the timing was unexpected. He thought of Lord, their upcoming wedding, and the plans they had made. "I'm honored by the offer, sir," he said, choosing his words carefully. "This is a fantastic opportunity, but I need to discuss it with my fiancée. Our wedding is just a month away, and we have made significant plans." The boss nodded understandingly. "Of course, take the time you need to talk it over with her. We understand this is a big decision. Just let us know as soon as possible." Leoncio left the office with a mixture of excitement and concern. He couldn't wait to tell Lord the news, but he also worried about how it would affect their plans. That evening, he sat with her and shared everything. Lord listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to contemplation. "This is an amazing opportunity for you, Leoncio," she said softly. "Paris. It's like a dream, but we need to think about what it means for us." Leoncio nodded, taking her hands in his. "I know. I don't want to jeopardize our future together. We need to make this decision together." They spent hours discussing the pros and cons, weighing their options, and imagining their life in Paris. By the end of the night, they both felt more at ease. "We can do this," Lord said confidently. "We can make it work. Paris will be an adventure, and we will face it together." Leoncio felt a surge of love and gratitude. "You're right. Together we can make anything work." The next day, Leoncio informed his boss of their decision to take the offer. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of wedding preparations and moving arrangements. The end of April arrived, and their wedding was a beautiful celebration of love and commitment. Surrounded by family and friends, Leoncio and Lord promised to support each other through every challenge and opportunity. Shortly after their wedding, they embarked on their new adventure, moving to Paris to start the next chapter of their lives. With love and determination, they embraced the future, ready to conquer whatever came their way. "Oh, congratulations," Leoncio said sincerely. "I wonder what I have to do with this," he thought to himself. "And you have a direct role to play in this," said the boss, as if reading his thoughts. Miss Sanchez was surprised. "You excelled at university. Your diploma speaks for itself. You have excellent reviews from your professors. You've also proven yourself to be a young but very promising specialist here. We need people like you. That's why I've decided to appoint you as the manager of the branch that is about to open in." He didn't manage to finish his sentence because the agitated Leoncio interrupted him. "I'm very flattered, sir, but does this mean I'll have to relocate?" The boss raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem for you?" Leoncio hesitated for a few minutes before responding. "The thing is, sir, I'm getting married soon." "How soon?" the boss asked, scrutinizing the young man. "In a month." The boss cleared his throat and adjusted the already perfectly arranged papers on the table. "I'm sorry, Leoncio, but this is a very important step for the company. I didn't just choose you randomly. I believe you have a great future ahead. If you lead our branch, you'll be on a path that many aspire to, but not everyone gets such a chance. Consider yourself very lucky." Leoncio nervously adjusted his tie as if it were choking him. "But what about the wedding? Invitations have already been sent out and—" "Postpone it for a short while. You'll go, settle in, then come back, have your wedding, and take your wife with you. It's simple." Leoncio still had doubts. "Tell me what's bothering you," the boss began to lose patience. Leoncio looked him in the eye. "I'm very worried that Lord—" "What about Lord? Can't you wait?" the boss smirked sarcastically. Sanchez nodded awkwardly. The boss stood up and began to pace nervously around the room. "What kind of love is it if the girl can't wait a couple of months? And why do you need such a wife?" Leoncio felt a pang of irritation at the boss's dismissive tone. "It's not just about waiting. We've planned everything. This is a significant moment for both of us." The boss stopped pacing and looked at him intently. "Listen, Sanchez, opportunities like this don't come around often. If Lord truly loves you, she'll understand the importance of this step for your career. You're being offered a chance to advance, to secure a future for both of you." Leoncio took a deep breath, considering the weight of his boss's words. "I understand the opportunity, sir. It's a lot to process. We've been looking forward to our wedding for so long." The boss softened his tone slightly. "I get it, Leoncio. But think about it this way, by taking this role, you're not only securing your future but also providing a better life for your future family. It's a temporary sacrifice for long-term gain." Leoncio nodded slowly, feeling the burden of the decision. "I'll need to discuss this with Lord," he said finally. "Of course," the boss replied. "But don't take too long. The company needs to move quickly on this. I believe in you, Sanchez. Make the right choice." Leoncio left the office with a heavy heart, his mind swirling with thoughts. That evening, he sat down with Lord, explaining the situation and the offer. Lord listened carefully, her expression shifting from surprise to contemplation. "This is an incredible opportunity, Leoncio," she said softly. "But it's also unexpected. We need to consider what this means for us." Leoncio took her hands in his. "I don't want to lose you or our plans, Lord, but this job could mean a secure future for us." Lord nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll find a way to make it work. Postpone the wedding if we have to. Our love is strong enough to handle this." Her unwavering support filled Leoncio with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord. Your understanding means everything to me." Together, they decided to embrace the challenge, confident in their love and future. Leoncio informed his boss of their decision, ready to take on the new role and the adventure that awaited them. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations and adjustments, but with Lord by his side, Leoncio felt ready to face whatever came their way. Their wedding, though postponed, was a beautiful celebration of their commitment and resilience. Surrounded by loved ones, they promised to support each other through every challenge, knowing their love would guide them. As they embarked on their new journey, Leoncio and Lord embraced the future, united in their dreams and the belief that together they could overcome anything. Leoncio understood that the boss's words were more than fair, but something inside him clenched at the thought of postponing the wedding and leaving Lord here. "Or do you want to be handpicked?" the boss continued. "To protest your fate is at stake right now. Not just yours, but your entire future family's. Doesn't you want to live decently and for your children not to need anything? Remember my words, you'll be a millionaire in no time. Do you want to miss such an opportunity?" The boss's arguments sounded more than convincing, and Leoncio reluctantly agreed. Back in his office, he could barely wait for the end of the workday. In the evening, he and Lord agreed to have dinner together. He bought a bouquet of crimson roses and hurried to the restaurant, which was a few blocks away from the office. He arrived first. Lord had written that she would be a little late. Leoncio sat at the table and rehearsed the speech he was going to say to his beloved for the 100th time. He had never been so nervous before, and his heart ached and didn't want to go anywhere. Finally, Lord appeared. She was wearing a striking dark blue dress with an open neckline. A silver bracelet sparkled beautifully on her wrist. She had swept her hair to one side and wore long silver earrings. All the men turned to look at her as she walked to the table where Leoncio was waiting for her. "How can I leave her alone and go?" he thought jealously as he rose. "Sorry, dear. Got stuck in traffic," Lord chirped, hugging him. He handed her a bouquet. "So beautiful." "Thank you, darling," the girl smiled. Leoncio helped her sit, then sat himself and cleared his throat. He knew he was about to ruin Lord's mood, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. "I need to tell you something," he said with a voice unfamiliar to him, trembling with nerves. Lord instantly sensed his state, and the smile faded from her face. "What happened?" the girl asked, concerned. Leoncio recounted the details of his conversation with his boss, carefully observing his beloved's reaction. Lord paled but quickly composed herself. "Of course, I'm upset that we'll have to postpone the wedding, but career prospects are very important for you, for us, and our future, your family. Your boss is right." Leoncio couldn't believe his ears. He knew Lord was sensible and rational, but he didn't expect her to accept this news so quickly and without much emotion. "What if she doesn't love me at all?" he briefly thought, but he quickly pushed away his doubts. "Thank you, my love," he said. "I'm so glad you understand the importance of what's happening." "Did you think I would make a scene over a couple of months' delay?" Lord laughed. Leoncio laughed too, feeling surprisingly relieved. "Yes, that's exactly what I thought, and I also don't have the money to pay for all the dishes you broke in this restaurant." The rest of the evening went perfectly, and the next day Leoncio began to prepare for his trip. Their meetings with Lord became even more tender. Both felt that the separation was approaching with each passing hour. On the day before his departure, Lord came to Leoncio. They sat on the couch and turned on some movie, but both were too distracted to follow the plot. Leoncio breathed in the scent of Lord's perfume, wanting to memorize every detail. The girl held on to her beloved tightly. Around midnight, Leoncio said he would call a taxi, but Lord shook her head. "Tonight I want to stay with you." Leonio's heart jumped in his chest. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to wait until the wedding." Lord nodded decisively. "Yes, I'm sure. Tonight I want to be with you." Early in the morning, Lord left. Leoncio asked her not to see him off at the airport. He knew saying goodbye there would be even harder. He didn't want to leave her crying among a crowd of strangers. As they said goodbye at the doorstep, both couldn't hold back their tears. "I'll write as soon as I land," Leonio whispered. Lord nodded. "I'll be waiting," she said. "I love you." "I love you too, and I already miss you." When Leoncio closed the door, he suddenly felt very scared. For a moment, he thought they might never see each other again. He wanted to rush out of the apartment and chase after the girl, but he restrained himself. That would look more than foolish. They had already decided everything. He didn't know that Lord was also standing behind the door, pressing her hands to her chest but hesitating to knock. The new country greeted Leonio more than warmly. Everyone treated him with respect, which amazed the young man. He himself felt very young and inexperienced. At first, it was difficult for him to adapt to the new life, but gradually the young man began to get used to it, and it became easier for him to fulfill his obligations. Every day he called and wrote messages to Lord. Time flew by quickly, and the lovers eagerly awaited their meeting. Leoncio had already bought the ticket. They only had to wait 2 more weeks. That evening, Leoncio called Lord as usual, but her phone was switched off. Strange, he thought. That had never happened before. The young man called back an hour later, but the result was the same. He called Lord all evening, but she remained unreachable. The next day, a message came: "Forgive me, Leonio. I met another man and fell in love with him." The young man almost dropped the phone. His hands trembled so much. He quickly dialed Lord's number again, but she didn't pick up. "Don't call me anymore," she wrote a minute later. Leoncio barely restrained himself from smashing the phone against the wall. How could she? After all the words she said to him, and he, like a fool, was waiting for their meeting, and she just betrayed him. Leoncio threw himself on the bed and, unable to hold back, burst into tears. By evening, he had a fever. He called the office and said he wouldn't be able to come to work tomorrow. He slept through the entire next day. The fever subsided, but Leonio couldn't get up and make himself do anything. He just wanted to forget. Fortunately, the next day was Saturday, and he didn't have to go to the office. Leoncio spent the whole day lying in bed again. He hardly ate anything. On Sunday, he got into the car provided by the company and drove out of town. He wandered through the surrounding fields for a long time, trying not to think about anything, but he couldn't erase Lord's image from his memory. The girl stood before his mental eyes as if alive. However much Leoncio tried, he couldn't help but feel love for her. "I must let her go," he said aloud. "She chose someone else." Returning home, Sanchez returned the ticket, took a bath, and shaved, determined to start a new life without Lord. He blocked her number to stop checking incoming calls and messages every minute. On Monday, the young man went to work, and the familiar life once again swept him into the whirlpool of events. Leoncio tried not to remember the past and not to think about the future. All he had left was the present, and he was ready to act and make the most of everything it could offer him. He succeeded in everything he undertook, and with each success, he reached higher peaks. Eventually, Leonio Sanchez left the company that had opened up so many opportunities for him, returned to his homeland, and started his own business. Luck favored him in everything. His business brought in more and more money, and one day, Leoncio became one of the most successful and wealthy people in the country. "So, what do you think my mother did?" Sanchez heard the question, which seemed to carry an Arctic chill. He blinked, pushing away the memories, and focused on Blanca's face. She looked at him hostilely. "She found someone else 2 weeks before the wedding." "Isn't that enough?" he said angrily. The blank expression on her face ignited as she looked at the millionaire in astonishment. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, bewildered. Leoncio stood up from the table and turned away to the window. Long-forgotten feelings of resentment, powerlessness, and despair surged back into him with renewed force. "So she kept this from me," the man bitterly uttered. Blanca remained silent, casting her eyes down. She no longer felt hatred towards the millionaire. Something about the man's posture and the tone of his voice made her reconsider her opinion of him. "I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure it's a mistake," she whispered. "After all, my mother was already pregnant with me 2 weeks before your wedding." Leonio felt like he misheard. He turned to the girl, staring at her incredulously. "What? But that can't be." Blanca bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. "My mother told me that you spent the night together before your departure. That's how I came into existence," she said softly. Leoncio nervously ran his hand through his hair and sat down. Then he closed his eyes, pain contorting his features. "Is it true?" he asked without lifting his gaze. "Just don't lie to me, please. I know what people are capable of for money." He looked at Blanca. She was as pale as a sheet. "I know you don't believe me," she murmured, "but I want to get to the bottom of this myself. I always dreamed of seeing my father, of feeling what it's like to be a beloved daughter. I've always been deprived of that. My mother said my father died, but one day I found her diary and learned everything." Leoncio looked at Blanca, unsure whether to believe her or not, but his heart squeezed in response to her words. He no longer saw her as a brazen hypocrite. No, there was something in her eyes that made her seem fragile and vulnerable. He wanted to embrace her like his own daughter, to stroke her hair for a long time, soothing her worries and instilling confidence in her for tomorrow. "I think only one person can give us the right answer. It's Lord," the man finally said decisively. "But she doesn't know I'm here," the girl said, frightened. "I got a job with you without her knowledge. She doesn't think highly of you. I've heard her say many times that you're a coward and a scoundrel when she saw you on TV." Leoncio flared up. "So that's what Lord thinks of me," he bitterly thought to himself. Then he stood up decisively and, circling the table, extended his hand to Blanca. "Let's go, señorita. We need to resolve this as quickly as possible. Your mother will have to give us an answer." They left the office, descended in the elevator, and got into an expensive car driven by an elderly chauffeur. "Where to, Mr. Sanchez?" he asked. Leoncio nodded at Blanca. The girl gave the address, and the car set off. On the way, Leoncio and Blanca remained silent. Finally, the car stopped in front of a rather affluent house. The man and the girl got out of the car. "Is Lord home?" Leoncio asked anxiously. "Yes, she's working remotely," Blanca replied. Leoncio hesitated. Perhaps it's worth warning her not to catch her off guard, but Blanca shook her head. "No, let's just do it now so she has no way to retreat." Sanchez nervously swallowed. Blanca took out a key from her purse and opened the door. They entered the bright hallway. "Mom, it's me," Blanca called out. "Is everything okay?" Leoncio heard a painfully familiar voice coming from somewhere very close. He suppressed the urge to rush into the adjacent room and embrace Lord. "Yes, but I'm not alone. I have a guest with me, and he wants to see you," Blanca declared. "Who is it?" the woman replied, and Leoncio heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. In a moment, Lord appeared at the threshold. She was wearing an elegant dark green dress and a white cardigan. Her hair was shorter than in her youth, but still the same shade of red. It cascaded in voluminous waves over her shoulders. Lord's gaze remained unchanged. Leoncio once again saw the same blue, mischievous eyes of the young woman he still couldn't forget. However, when Lord realized who stood before her, shock flickered in her eyes. She anxiously covered her mouth with her hand. "Hello, Lord," Leoncio murmured softly. His hands trembled, his heart pounded desperately in his chest. "What are you doing here?" Lord asked harshly, finally regaining her composure. She crossed her arms and looked at the man with hostility and coldness. "I came to find out the truth," Leonio admitted. "What truth are you interested in?" Lord retorted. At that moment, Blanca intervened in the conversation. "Mom, are we just going to stand in the doorway? Let's go into the room." Lord shifted her gaze to Blanca, and her facial expression softened slightly. She silently turned and headed into the living room, with Leonio following her and Blanca bringing up the rear. As everyone sat down, there was palpable tension in the room. Sensing it, Blanca decided she was unnecessary here. As soon as the girl left, Leonio couldn't hold back and spoke as if all those years hadn't passed. "Why are you angry with me? It was you, not me, who didn't answer my calls and then wrote that you met someone else and fell in love." Lord raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "What? I never wrote that," she exclaimed. "I was pregnant and waiting for you to tell you about it in person, not over the phone, and you just disappeared and blocked my number." "Are you saying I made it all up?" Leoncio replied in the same tone. "Wait a moment. Something bizarre occurred before everything else. I clearly recall losing track of my phone. I was absolutely convinced I had placed it on my nightstand, but it inexplicably vanished. The following morning, to my utter astonishment, I found it hidden under my pillow. I never put it there, but in my overwhelming relief at finding it, I didn't question the weirdness of the situation. Filled with hope, I eagerly checked for missed calls and messages from you, expecting to see a flurry of communication, but there was nothing. The screen was completely blank. Feeling more and more perplexed, I dialed my own number, only to hear the eerie message that my number had been blocked. I sat there, perched on the edge of my bed, a wave of confusion and unease crashing over me. Just then, my sister walked into the room. She casually asked how I was feeling, and I poured out my frustration about not being able to contact you. "He's probably moved on and found someone else," Federica commented with chilling indifference before walking out, leaving her cold words to echo painfully in my mind. "What's wrong with you?" Leonio asked, his voice trembling. He felt an overwhelming urge to hold Lord close and never let go. "Federica ran away from home when she turned 18, she said, her voice breaking. "We don't know where she is or if she's even alive. Our parents nearly went mad with worry. It completely undermined their health." "I'm so sorry," Lord Leonio whispered. He hesitantly stood up and approached her, then slowly sat down on the couch next to her. With a gentle embrace, he hugged her, afraid she might push him away. But instead, Lord leaned into him and cried even harder. They sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, until her sobs finally subsided. "So Blanca is my daughter?" Leonio asked cautiously. Lord simply nodded in response. "I'm deeply sorry for how things ended up," Sanchez uttered with a voice filled with bitterness and regret. "I regret missing out on witnessing her birth and the precious moments of her childhood." Overwhelmed by a profound sense of emptiness and sorrow, he bowed his head, the weight of his loss pressing down on him. Lord, with a tender touch, ran her fingers through his hair, offering solace. "But you're here now, aren't you? The past is unchangeable, but the present is yours to embrace. Blanca has found you, and she needs you more than ever before." With a newfound resolve, the millionaire lifted his head, determination gleaming in his eyes. "I will be there for her, no matter what." Turning to Lord, his gaze softened with tenderness. "And what about you? Do you need me?" Lord's smile was warm and genuine as she nodded. "Yes, I do. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you, Leonio Sanchez." Her words filled Sanchez with an overwhelming sense of joy and fortune, making him feel like the luckiest man alive. He clung to the only woman he had ever truly loved, and for the first time in 22 years, he allowed himself to dream of a future filled with hope and happiness. He knew now, with absolute certainty, that his dreams were destined to come true. And that brings us to the end of our story, where the millionaire decided to test the new maid by leaving the safe open and turning on the camera. What insights have you gained from this tale of trust, love, and rediscovery? We would love to hear one thing you have learned and how you plan to apply it in your own life. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you more captivating stories. Thank you so much for watching.